Bruce, here we go.
Ron,
Bruce, this is it, man. This is the penultimate episode. My man, are you ready for this? I want to start us off by saying this, Bruce. I just want to say two of us riding no, sorry, what? Oh, wait, what are we talking about? Oh, get back to where you once, what? Sorry, what? We're talking, that's right, that's right. We are talking about Get Back, the the documentary experience. I mean, I feel like I could have been to Europe in the time that it took for this movie to happen, for me to watch the whole thing. But yeah, Get Back, the documentary on Disney Plus. We just watched it. Um, so much to talk about. It's overwhelming to talk because, like, sorry, I want to throw you. I know you have pages of notes, Bruce, but I just want to throw this down. I'm going to let you
yeah,
talk. I swear. But like,
no,
it's in preparation for this. I go like, are we talking about this as a movie? Because I don't really like. It's not to me. It's not a movie. It's just a bunch of things that happen. And then do we talk about their performances? Because I mean, I've been listening to Let It Be nonstop since watching this movie. So like, do we talk about their performances? Do we talk about their behavior? Do we talk about what brought down the Beatles? It's like, where did you even want to like start? The needle in the haystack. Bruce, help me out. You academic genius of art and pop culture. I don't mean
that's
academic.
yeah, no major buildup there, Ron. By the way, welcome everyone to the Ron and Bruce show. In case you didn't catch it already, I am Bruce, and you are greeted by my co-host Ron. Um, well, here's the thing, Ron. You want to give some context to this first, to the how this whole thing came about, and kind of where the Beatles were leading into this particular project, and then we can kind of get into a very short kind of history of Let It Be, and the kind of problematic history and reputation that it has, and then just go right into what Peter Jackson did here and gave us this Thanksgiving holiday.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's a good place to start because, and I don't know if I'm answering the question in the order that you just asked it, but I'm almost starting at the ending. Um, I do want to understand the context, Bruce. I'm sure you understand it much more in depth than I do because I was good like 30 years ago. No, it's not like 25 years ago when I saw Let It Be the movie, and I was like,
Yeah.
oh, these guys hate each other. They look tired. They look over it. And they don't like I don't see the love in that movie, right? Which was a behind the scenes kind of look, a peek into the making of an album, and through that you see how they're not as close, right? That's the basis of Let It Be, right? The movie. This was what Peter Jackson, I mean, like what he puts out there is like 50 hours of footage condensed into 30, or like how long? It was like 10 hours, right? Almost 10
Seven and a
hours.
half to be precise. Yeah.
Don't say 7.5 in front of me. I get insecure. But but like yeah. So tell me, what's the context for this one? Why is this different than the other one?
Well, I think for the longest time, Beatles fans have been clamoring for an official release of Let It Be to begin with, right? Because for the most part, this film has not really been officially available or in circulation since like the early 80s VHS Laserdisc versions of it. So, it's something that Beatle fans have been clamoring for because we pretty much have all the other films. They've all been released officially on Blu-ray. But Let It Be was always that one contentious one that the estates couldn't agree on just because, again, the reputation, even they bought into it. It was a hard thing for them to revisit. There were hints of it when like the Let It Be Naked project was released that there was talk that we were going to get a Blu-ray then, and it didn't happen. But this has been a long gestating thing. I mean, the project kind of was snake bitten from the beginning, and you see this through the course of this movie, them trying to kind of get back to basically live performance because they pretty much, up until like from 64 to 67, it was just this constant upward trajectory, artistic trajectory, right? As far as, it peaks in 67 with Pepper, which I think was kind of their artistic triumph. And I think the last time that they were really on the same page in terms of a collective vision, they hit the peak. And what happens is they hit the same problem that Pink Floyd later would after Dark Side of the Moon, where they pretty much hit the zenith with that, where do you go from there? And just as easily as all these sort of magical elements came into place to get them to, like, all the world conquering and all the awesome, incredible things that they did, just as easily as that happened is as easily as things start to unravel in late 67, because shortly after Pepper, they lose Brian Epstein. Brian Epstein, their manager, passes away. And he was, like, obviously, aside from George Martin, their record producer, he's like the stabilizing force, the daddy figure, the only really senior figure that the Beatles will respect and listen to. So he passes. That leaves a huge gap in terms of, having to step up in terms of management. They jump immediately into Magical Mystery Tour, which was like an ill-fated project. And, pretty soon, just, Paul sort of being one of the alpha males in the band, he's dreaming up projects, ways to keep the band busy and engaged. But at the same time, he's in a precarious position because he has to step up from just being kind of a band member to now the one trying to direct things. And of course, that's going to create friction in the band, right? So they go from that 67 to 68, which 68, you can kind of label it like everybody had a hard year because, it's the White Album sessions, which proved to be very, very problematic. It was well chronicled in Jeff Emmerich's book, Here, There, and Everywhere. Tremendous book if you ever a chance to read it. Their engineer from then. A lot of really great insight into their recording career and what their personalities were in that context. John introduces Yoko into the picture, so she's with him constantly during the White Album sessions. They're fraught with tension. They're growing apart. John and Paul are writing separately. George is starting to really step up as a talent, but again, having to battle to shoehorn his songs into the picture. So, they come off of that, and really, unfortunately, just because of the pace of 60s bands, the pace of recording, you're recording 2 albums a year, the touring cycle, all that stuff. They never take the break that they should have. I think after the White Album, there should have been a warning sign to maybe take 6 months to a year away from each other, and kind of iron out some tensions. They start Apple, and that's the beginning of another series of problems that they have down the road. And just so after this, it leads into the Let It Be project that, we all know. And again, fraught with tension, which we see in this. They didn't whitewash it as many people suspected. But the beauty of this, where we're going to arrive at, is that, Peter Jackson, a stellar filmmaker, gets the chance to sit through this unbelievable treasure trove of footage that has just sat in a vault somewhere for over 50 years. And he gets to sift through those 50 hours, starts by trying to whittle it down to what he called like a manageable 18 hours that they can at least start to then try and edit it from there. And, this was supposed to come out as a theatrical film a couple years ago, got pushed because of the pandemic. Then all of a sudden we hear there's going to be a Disney Plus stream thing. It goes from what we thought was going to be like a 2-hour film to, this 7.5-hour epic over multiple days. And so that's kind of how we arrive at where we're at as far as Let It Be.
Yeah.
/ Get Back.
Yeah. I know. I'm surprised that they didn't call the album Get Back.
Well, that was the original idea. Was the original idea. And there was a Glenn Johns mix early on in the process, which is part of this box set now, which we now have. But, the band rejected it. They were never really happy with, how those mixes came out. And I think they quickly moved on to Abbey Road. So the Let It Be thing got shelved for a while. It comes out after they have broken up. So it inherits this reputation as like the breakup movie, even though chronologically it isn't quite there, but you do see the seeds for it. You just start seeing obviously the tensions are very clear. The power struggles, all that stuff that's going on is very, very clear to see, even in this version.
But I will say, something that you and I joked about is that structurally with this movie that's kind of challenging to watch is the tedium. Like they really dive into the tedium of creating an album and like churning out. And I just had this vision of like George writing. I mean, George actually kind of does, like, George goes home, writes a song, comes in, my, like he showed, like, it's great, like, right? But Paul and John, I was assuming they did the same thing, where they would go home, finish it up, plunk it up. But they brought, like, Paul specifically, you see the gestation and the genesis of a song. And that was really illuminating and cool. And it kind of like if someone's a songwriter, I'm not. I'm my daughter makes fun of me about not being a songwriter. In my act, in my comedy act, I sing and I do cover songs. And my daughter's like, you should write your own song, like I do. She writes her own song. She wrote this hit where she's like, I put it on like a noodle, I take it off like a poodle. That was a song that she wrote. It's fucking great. But you see these guys create a song out of nowhere, like you and I were texting throughout, like where Paul is just messing around with the bass, and then do like, and he's like, and he's plunking chords, right? Like he's doing chords on his bass.
Yeah, which was an interesting thing because he's getting a rhythm and he's got some kind of power chords going on there. So yeah, that was very, very cool to see, and I think that's one of the highlights of this version of Get Back is seeing the genesis of that, and the fact that that sat in a vault for this many years is unbelievable to me, because go ahead.
Yeah, no, because it's like I want to address. Let's start with that. Let's start with highlights. Like, let's go with the positive highlights first that just really stuck out for you. What were some for you, like, that really stuck out where you're like, this is so illuminating? Like, that's what I'm curious about.
I think, like a lot of people watching it, it was the creativity and just the effortless creativity that you see. I mean, they put in hours, they worked, and they're in an uncomfortable environment. Even though, like I said, I've always loved the Let It Be project. I've been partial to it. I love it because it's them getting back to rock and roll after this almost being like an artsy prog band for a couple of years, which I also love. I love the scope of this band. But I like, with the White Album and Let It Be starting getting into that. And I also have to confess, I love the Twickenham setting. I think it's much more atmospheric. Has more of a vibe for cinema. I love the cameras and the cranes and just the whole thing of it. It just looks like a band almost in a rehearsal stage for going out on tour. I find the Apple sessions, like that area almost like a dumpy basement. This is again for my taste.
It's claustrophobic.
But for them, it's uncomfortable. They're you can see they're fish out of water. They feel like they're not getting a good sound. So they're struggling a lot with that. But even in the midst of this, you see songs coming. I think Paul was a little bit more prepared in the sense that it looked like he had more in his pocket, and more just kind of kept flowing. Like that guy just was like a riverbed of songs. He just couldn't stop it. And you see throughout this, him plonking away at, early versions of how, Let It Be, Long and Winding Road, Another Day, Teddy Boy, songs that would also, be like solo cuts. John comes in with like a couple of songs, and then you see them, the gestation period and how they grow. But for me, that was the mind-blowing thing of just seeing these songs in real time come to life. It's basically the Beatles reality show in a way. So it's kind of also very contemporary in that sense. It's the Beatles if you put them in reality television. So I love that. And I loved that even though at this stage they had tensions, and the relationships were fraught with all kinds of subtext, you do see the love and the brotherhood still coming through. In the end, they're not dumping anyone. They're still trying to pull people back into the circle who leave. You see the huddles. I thought that was like a beautiful scene where John, Paul, and Ringo are kind of in that huddle at the end of the very dramatic ending of cliffhanger ending of part one. So yeah, I think that just seeing the creativity, the birth of these songs, seeing their interaction, how they are, that's the stuff that stuck out for me. How about you?
Yeah. I would say, I agreed with everything you said. Like, I would say there was a few things. At the core of it is fundamentally humanizing the Beatles. Like, spending this many hours with them at their job, right? Like, this was, at that point, the Beatles, like you said, like, I think I got the sense after the White Album, which I think is, that's, Let It Be is, like, Abbey Road is my absolute favorite, but it's definitely like Abbey Road, Let It Be, White Album, like those for me, that's my Beatles, like that, like different, like give different, like that's my Luke or whatever,
Yeah.
But those are my Beatles. Today I listened to Anthology too. And I like a lot of those songs for sure, like Hide Your Love Away and I'm Only Sleeping is the first song I learned how to play guitar. Like that's the first song I learned to learn to play the guitar. I had the Beatles Anthology book and I looked up the chords, and I don't know why that song, that's not like one of my favorite songs, but I'm Only Sleeping was like the song that taught me how to play guitar. So I was never like, I love that. I love Rubber Soul. I love Revolver, but like White Album, like Let It Be, and again, a top Abbey Road. So watching this era of songs happening and the guys at this stage in their life, humanizing them, really seeing that it wasn't, and we'll talk about this later, but to me, my takeaway was it wasn't just Yoko. I think a lot of it was them growing up. Like the older that they got, I think it was harder for them to kind of keep that lightning in a bottle. So it's great sitting with them at this stage in their lives for this many hours and seeing just how personable they are. So that's the big one that I really I was like, this is so cool. Like you said, reality show, but like it felt more real. It felt like legit. And seeing them as humans. I love, and so like I'm obsessed. I'm a horrible, not horrible. I'm not a great singer, but I'm obsessed with singing. I love singing, and so to hear where these guys like the male voice I've heard is like at 27 is really when it sets.
Yeah.
So to hear my favorite thing about this was to hear Paul at 28, 29, what his voice is able to do. It's very different than when he's 5 years earlier, 6 years earlier when they're just starting out or like at that point. Yeah, I mean 10 years earlier ultimately, but
Yeah.
but when they're really hitting it big, it's like it's only 6 years earlier. It's not that long of a time period. So to hear what he's able to do with his voice hour upon hour upon hour, I'm like, I was always, I love, I mean, I love Vanilla Ice Cream. I love Superman. I love Paul McCartney. I don't care. Like he's not the most textured and layered. I don't care. He is, to me, the most talented out of them.
No, he's unbelievable. His singing is unbelievable. And it really, I think, with Abbey Road and stuff, it really peaks. Working with George Martin, I think, helped a lot too, because his singing just got better and better. But it's a phenomenal instrument and Bob Dylan was always one to even say this, is that Paul's a guy who could sing everything. He could sing, ballads, could sing rockers, everything in between. So it's just a phenomenal thing to just watch.
And you hear it. Long and Winding Road is this beautiful tenor ballad, that's an open sound, and then Get Back or any of the bluesier rock songs where he's fully throating it, and it sounds phenomenal. In contrast, I had a real hard time listening to John try to hit those notes, and John talks about like his voice straining, and that also made me feel like he's human. This definitely humanized John for me. Whereas like I think I told you on the phone a couple days ago, I was like, where I just had this perception that John Lennon walks in the room and he's so abstract and esoteric and out there that people are just like, oh, right this way, John. I mean, there's definitely like, you see it though, that they're like, when he talks, they're like, ha ha ha. Like, and Carol gets her oats or whatever, okay, yeah, that's funny, John. Anyway, let's just keep going. But he was a person to me in this. Like, he definitely was a person that was flawed, that he couldn't sing sometimes, and that's because he's pushing. Whereas I did appreciate, so his voice really secures, in my opinion, really it becomes deeper and richer, but he doesn't stay in that range. He's trying to push it, like Adultery, who's a high baritone who can sing full on high tenor, but John just can't. He just can't in this movie. I think he's been pushing his voice so far since Twist and Shout, that it's just, I think it took its toll in this. So I really kind of appreciated the humanity of that too, and I'm trying to think, watching, you're right, still watching the love, watching that they never, to me, an American group would be like, fuck you, they would just start screaming and throwing things. They're professionals. They don't do that. They're like, okay, no, you're getting mad at me, but I'm just trying to help, it's very.
Yeah. Even the worst of arguments here is not what you would see in many other bands. There's still a layer of diplomacy and respect. You see the cracks starting to appear, but it's nowhere near the screaming, shouting matches that you would, see in many, and you've heard about in many other bands.
I said American band, but I'm thinking The Who. I mean, there's times where Pete would just take a guitar and hit Roger Daltrey, right?
Yeah.
And
yeah, you have bands that have come to blows over left, so you could tell these guys, it was a brotherly thing, it was a fractured thing. And like you said, there was a lot of contributing elements, not just Yoko, Although I don't want to completely give her a pass like a lot of Yoko apologists want to do, and
No,
we'll get
we're
into
not. We are not Yoko apologists. We do not like this individual.
that. But we'll try to kind of keep it fair. But I do think that there are a lot of people out there that watch this and are kind of like, oh, she kind of wasn't as bad or whatever. But it's more about the intrusion of presence, breaking up the chemistry of the four. And it's not a misogynistic thing for people who are automatically, hitting the cancel button. This would be for any individual that tried to kind of be a constant presence among that inner circle and not contributing musically. You know what I mean? Like a Billy Preston who was, invited and is there to serve a purpose. It's a completely different thing, But the thing with John and Yoko was, their codependence was a bit disturbing to watch at times in this.
So I again, like I feel like people are watching this. So like I'm gonna say this. So I'm a hardcore, and I know Bruce, you're gonna. I'm a hardcore feminist. I work with a women's organization. The majority of my clients are powerful, very successful women. So I'm saying this this is not misogynist. Like I am all about what this woman could have been a dude. It doesn't matter. You see John get annoyed with her. She is so clingy. And you just know, like you just know. I've been in controlling relationships, and it's just that she you see her like plugging away at him and just grating at him, and he's not a victim. I mean, he brought her there, but like there's moments where he's just like he like looks at her, and he's like, "What do you want from me?"
And there are moments in this film where she is seeking his attention, where he's elsewhere, like screaming at microphone John and going into that bit, and so. I don't think she deserves the full pass that she's getting from a lot of people who have watched this. I don't want to completely vilify her either, because again, it was one contributing element. If it wasn't Yoko, they were going to break up anyway, just because of that fishbowl existence and simply growing up and each one of them wanting to take more charge of their music. It's like, it's tiring to be in that bad situation and have to like submit your songs. Like poor George, who's bringing in like gems to these guys. They're giving more time to like dig it than they are to All Things Must Pass. I mean, they do a perfunctory version of it, but you can see why George is frustrated and where he's at, because you watch this and he's pretty surly throughout the whole thing, or for the majority of it, at least the first half of it. And you kind of think, man, he's kind of always negative and all that stuff. And the vibe between him and Paul from the get-go is not good. They're not having screaming matches, but if you're really watching closely and like Paul does have that bossy, condescending big brother tone when speaking to George, and George, you can see him kind of getting his little digs in back, subtly to, kind of the passive aggressive thing they have going back and forth.
It's awful considering like you're saying, like oh my God, the George songs are gorgeous. They're just beautiful songs. They're easy to listen to, easy to follow. And you see Paul being like, okay. Like he's like an annoying little brother. It's like, okay, like you're wasting my time. Can we get back to work, John? And it's so rude. Whereas John's bringing crap. I'm sorry. I mean, I listen to Dig a Pony a lot. But Dig a Pony is great. But like Across the Universe is great. But like mine is just gorgeous. Like I don't know. I just think it's so rude. I was really surprised by how uneven it was, and I took it for granted in the past. I just thought George signed up to be the talented guitarist.
Yeah. But the thing is, he sees how successful John and Paul are, with the songwriting, and starts writing songs of his own. Obviously he's under the masters there, kind of learning and absorbing, and he's getting better. But I would say, I mean, I'm a big fan of George's songs. There's not a George song on a Beatles record that I don't like, whether he's singing a cover or it's his own songs. I've loved everything that he contributed to the Beatles. And he's especially getting strong this period from like White Album on. It's blockbusters. While I Get My Guitar Gently Weeps, still to me one of the top 5 Beatles songs of all time. Just amazing. And he's maturing. He's the only one that seems to be grounded at this point too, whether it's because he took the most out of their sojourn to India and is the most dedicated to that. But he's finding himself and he can see through a lot of the ego, kind of outward showiness of the other two. So, you have that tension throughout this whole thing.
You're absolutely right. Like I would say that's another positive because I was annoyed with him in the first part. I was like, ew.
Yeah.
Like I had so much reverence for him and I really liked him and I'm like why is he so cranky? Like why is he being so weak? And that's I think he's the one that goes on the biggest hero's journey in this series. First of all, musically, I mean like vocally, I mean just bringing it back, like he grows as a singer. Like you're right, like starting in the White Album, like because even just listening to his earlier stuff, like he's good, but oh my God, like just vocally, I think he really comes into his own. Musically, you see that he wants to start expressing. He wants to start doing his own thing. He wants to start voicing. Um, but I still have to say though, I had a hard time understanding him when he talked, like because he was just like you're right. He's the most grounded, but when he's talking, it still feels very airy and very artsy and not
Mhm.
rooted in like music. It felt like you know. I'm like, what? Did you feel that? Like, do you know what I'm talking about? Like he
No,
grows the most, but I can't.
for me, these voices are like a second language for me. I'm so steeped in it that like I immediately I get what they're saying. I'm just so steeped in Beatles language and just their voices and stuff. So it's like listening to family.
Well, then let's talk about another relative that was completely. I think he's in the movie. I'm not sure. Um, he's in it for a little bit. Ringo. Right? Ringo could not give less of a fuck about this whole project. Like he is a session musician in this movie. He's doing movies. He is elsewhere. Like the scene with when they bring in oh my God, I forgot his last name. Peter Sellers. Oh my God, that's embarrassing.
Yeah.
Peter Sellers. And like you see how excited he is. And like he is so much closer to Peter Sellers than he is to any of these guys at this point. You know?
He's sleepy throughout this whole thing. He looks bored a lot of times. Unfortunately, they get a lot of shots of him kind of yawning and nodding off and stuff like that. But great team player that he is. He's there for when he's needed. And when the songs start up, there he is, engaged. And I'm bringing his unique musicality. I mean, one of the best drummers ever. And he always brought something to a song that lent it that stamp, but always in service of the song. That's the one thing about Ringo that makes him a hero among drummers who really understand, the function of drums within a songwriting collective. Always contributed beautiful parts, and so he's there when he's needed. But you can imagine being the drummer in a band if you're not the guy spearheading the song and all that stuff. You're sitting there, and he imagine especially in those Twickenham sessions. You're just sitting there watching these kind of egos go back and forth and constant takes of that. I think anyone would go mad in that, because, until he has a part to play in that, it's a challenge. It'd be a challenge for anyone to sit through, those many hours and that many takes of,
I got a feeling.
I got a feeling and all that. Yeah.
That's what we're talking about. And it's like, do you think the movie should have cut the 75th take and the start and stop? That's why in the beginning of this I started and stopped. Do you think that like they should have like
Absolutely.
Peter Jackson? Yeah,
without a doubt. Now here's the thing. I think there's room for multiple cuts of this. I've seen other YouTubers kind of post their reactions and stuff, and have had interesting debates about this. I think a lot of hardcores feel like it's about time we got some love, some service. Because a lot of Beatles projects as of late, if you go to like Ron Howard's 8 Days a Week or a lot of other kind of documentaries and things, it's usually the common denominator. It's not trying to aim for, a mass audience. So this is obviously a labor of love that has been put out there for hardcore fans. I think it's a tough thing for casual people to sit through this many hours of it. And, I can't be convinced otherwise. I do think that there is a much better 3-hour version of this that could be made. Now, I appreciate that this cut exists, and I think it should exist for hardcores. My feeling is that there should have been a 3-hour cut for the Disney Plus version that was split over 2 nights. Hour and a half one night, hour and a half the other night. 2 nights, period. You get a nice condensed version. And then for like the massive Blu-ray release, you have the 7.5-hour release. I mean, they're talking about potentially an 18-hour director's cut of this coming out eventually as well. I think this is a big enough pile of material that you can service all these different audiences. So I don't think it has to be one or the other. Yeah, I mean, if it came down to it, I will say that I would choose a 7.5 hour version, being the fanatical fan that I am. But I think there's room for multiple cuts to help ease in more of a general audience and kind of keep the property going and moving forward.
Yeah, it's a great point. Like my co-parent was out of town for the whole week, and so I had my daughter to myself, and which is a lot of work. And and I was still able. I was surprised by how drawn to it. And I don't normally watch my iPad while she's watching her shows. I normally like when I'm with her, I'm with her. But like I was just with her so much, so I was like, "You watch your show, I'm gonna watch my show." And I was surprised by how engaged I was. So an 18 hours to me is daunting as hell. Like that is too much unless I'm flying to like like Australia. Um, but I was surprised by how the 7.5 hour. Yeah, there were times I'll be honest, I fast forward because I was like, oh my god, they're gonna talk about the show again. Like they're gonna talk about like, well, I want to perform outside, but I don't want to perform outside, but I want to perform. Yeah, like that was repetitive, and it wasn't getting anywhere. And I've been in production meetings. I don't want to like I don't want to sit in someone else's production meeting,
Yeah.
where it's like, no, it should be the red one. The red one. It's the red. Yeah, use the red one. No,
Well,
no.
some people would make the argument that that's part of Peter Jackson's what he's trying to illustrate here, right? Because he's a creative person. He's trying to show you what the creative process is, good and bad, right? So it's not all rainbows and horseshoes and all that stuff. So it's a daunting thing to sit through.
Sorry. I love that. I love that you attempted to say something like whimsical because you don't do whimsical, and that was so hard for you. Like rainbows and horseshoes. Like
Yeah.
you couldn't even say unicorns, man. You couldn't even say unicorns.
We'll throw unicorns in there.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, no problem. But I do think that that's what he's trying to show, right? He's trying to show the full process, and good and bad. You're sitting through the kind of the tedium, and he's trying to really deeply illustrate the tedium of all that stuff. But it makes it more of an academic exercise rather than an entertaining one at times.
Yeah, it's not entertaining. I mean, it's just not like even the concert. We get more footage of the concert at the end, which like those takes, like those performances are great, but they're still repeating the songs, right? Like they do some of the songs twice. Like they did Get Back, like.
Yeah, you have to do a couple for safety. So I think that was part of just the filming process, which is why I love that they did the split screen for this. I know a lot of people were not happy with that because they felt like they wanted to see the performance, and rightly so, because you sit through the 6 hours, 6.5 hours to get to the Rooftop performance, and a lot of people wanted to see the full Rooftop. They were promised that they were going to see the full performance of it rather than the edited version that we got in Let It Be. But I liked it because it really showed the impact of it as an event that was happening live and was impacting the whole area where they were situated in. It made it more of a live feel, and you kind of get more of that as opposed to just showing them the whole time, and that would still feel like they're kind of isolated up in the ether in their own kind of alternate reality. So I like that we got the multiple cuts, and it made it more, I guess it was a way of Peter Jackson to make it more his stamp on it.
That makes a lot of sense. That really does make sense because, like, you would ask me like, what, or you said like we're gonna talk about him as a director on this, and I was like, I never thought about him as a director in this because I'm still thinking King Kong. Like I never saw the Lord of the Rings, so like to me, like I think Peter Jackson, King Kong. But you're right, that is a very stylistic choice. It also created a lot of tension. It also created, like, I loved that it created even more relatability because the split screen, because you go like, could you imagine, like, as Beatles fans, you go, could you imagine you're going out to lunch, that their office is right there, but like all of a sudden there's new songs. Like, am I listening to a new, like, are those new songs I'm going to hear in a few months? Like, like I could, right? But you got to figure half of those people didn't opt in for that.
No, because it's a business district. That's the thing too. It's not like some artsy,
Right.
neighborhood where, it's not Haight-Ashbury where, people would have like flipped their minds, this is a business district. So you have some of the crotchety old people,
Yeah.
you said had some hip older people that were like, yeah, love the Beatles kind of thing. So that was kind of cool to see
That was cool.
that there wasn't, that how, even then, how wide ranging their audience was. You had older people that did like them, but you had the crotchety, straight laced business people that it was like, hey, they're kind of disrupting, disturbing the peace and all that stuff. So it was cool. It made for more drama too, to see that range of
Yeah.
reactions, going on there. But imagine having, if you were a fan and you happened to catch that. I mean, just, I'd be able to die a happy man then.
Yeah, I mean it's just uncanny. Have you ever seen like the remaining like Paul or Ringo in concert?
Oh, I've seen Paul multiple times live. Yeah, I've had the privilege. I was lucky enough for the first time to catch him in '89 when he started touring up again, because I was too young for the Wings tour that he did in '76. But, when he toured in '89, that was my first chance to catch him, which was a phenomenal experience. I've seen him multiple times since then.
And in '89 he's doing everything, right? He's doing Wings and Beatles stuff, right?
Yeah, that's where he gets comfortable with the legacy again and reintroduces a lot of the Beatles stuff. So it was phenomenal to see. It was amazing. And he brought back the Hofner to tie it back in with this, because he had used the Rickenbacker a lot for a lot of the sessions, Rubber Soul, Revolver, just because it was a more kind of stable bass that would keep the tuning better. But for this, because they're kind of going back to roots thing, he brought back the Hofner, and you can even see when George says, isn't your Rickenbacker better? And Paul's like, no, I like this, because it's lighter. So that was cool.
I think I have a CD from that. I mean, I don't think I have it anymore. I had a CD of him. I think it's that tour. That's what I'm like. And he's got that bass and it's half and half. It's like half Beatles songs, half. So that's cool. That's blows. I didn't know you were there for that. That's pretty cool. Anyway.
Yeah.
That's super cool.
Rosemont Horizon in Chicago, and then the following year he hit Soldier Field, and I was there for that show too. So
is that still going, Rosemont Horizon? That's still a venue, right?
It's Allstate Arena now.
Oh, okay, that's what it is, and it's off of 290.
Yeah.
Okay, and no, not 290, 90. Anyway, it doesn't matter. I used to live in Chicago. Okay, I'm just trying to think. I used to drive past it. Bruce, what is your critique of the movie? Let's talk about the things that really got under your skin. Is John's behavior, his heroin-induced, manic behavior in this, and was that part of your no thank you to this movie?
I guess historically, knowing what this period was, I knew what we were in for. Although this really, John is such a complex figure, and this really lived up to it because, in the first part, he seems a bit withdrawn, not quite in the groove yet. He's still contributing, but you see he's a little bit more withdrawn. And, unfortunately, it's been well chronicled, him and Yoko are in their heroin phase and all that too. So I think that's a contributing factor to, there are moments where he just seems a bit off and disengaged. I think by part two, I don't know what, took the Flintstone vitamin that day, but he's much more into it, and mugging for the camera. It's ironic because a lot of people are saying that they expected John to be the sullen one and were surprised that it was George who was the sullen one and John was the one who was more animated. And so you see the full range of John because he's a very complex guy, right? He's got that very tough exterior that I think is masking, kind of a deep vulnerability. And so he's always had those two sides to him. He's, capable of writing in a way that, as much as I love Paul, there's a depth to some of John's lyrics and the emotion of his songs that sometimes Paul doesn't quite reach. But what really, I think just my main critique of this is just that, especially that second part, it is the tedium of it. And even me as a big fan, it was a big ask to sit through a lot of these takes. And the frustrating thing, which again, it's part of the stop-start of this process that they're going through, but you get, half-baked versions of only snippets of songs. They stop, they talk a bit, they horse around. So they never fall into a groove of songs until you get to the third part, which for me was the most satisfying because finally you're getting fuller versions of the songs. They're more in a groove kind of thing. So that was the main thing for me, is that I felt that it was a little bit too much of the tedium.
Yeah, precisely. And like, yeah, you're so right about John too. Like I was really surprised that he really looked like he wanted to be there. Like, I mean, like eventually, like, or he want more than Ringo. Like, but like, I got the sense that he was excited about the project, at times.
Yeah, for all the talk of like, him kind of being the first to leave and stuff like that, still at
Yeah.
this point, he wants to be a Beatle, and to him, he even points out in here that, this is a vehicle of communication for me. So even if it was his own agenda and, way to express himself, he was still in it. And he's still, in a lot of ways, he's almost the most patient and the most tolerant,
Yeah.
and the most supportive at times, really, which is kind of strange, because again, it kind of goes against, a lot of this film goes against the narrative that we know. But you could see his patience with Paul, which you would think he would cap off a little bit on, especially as controlling at times as Paul was, and as domineering. But no, you see a lot of, kind of a wellspring of patience and goodwill, especially in the second part where he steps back into a leadership role instead of just abdicating that strictly to Paul, getting a little bit more of that balance back. So that was surprising to see, how into it these sessions that he got, despite like the reputation, and him really bad mouthing these sessions later, as calling it the shittiest, recorded stuff that they ever did, badly recorded shit. You see here that he's much more in it.
Right. And so I'm confused about that narrative then, just looking at as all these hours, because right, he looks like he's the one that like cares about Ringo. He's the one that cares about George. Like and you're right, he's not punching Paul in the face.
No, and a lot of people too, all Paul so domineering and stuff like that. But in all fairness to Paul, I mean, this is also paints a very sympathetic portrait of Paul. It had to be frustrating for him because obviously he's alpha. He's one of the alphas in this band. He's trying to get stuff done, and you could see how aimless and undisciplined they were here.
Yeah.
Which is also kind of my regret that so much of the the footage that we're going to live with this band is of this period, right? Because I would love if there had been a similar fly on the wall for when they were really together, working as a tight unit, and even under certain deadline. But also, I mean, this is the same band that recorded their first album in a day, right?
Wow. Yeah.
Now, granted, they had the material, so they didn't have to come up with the material from scratch. But it's a different thing when you're under studio time and those kinds of pressures. Once they have this load of success, studio time's not an issue. So you could see the aimlessness, whereas I think, earlier in their career, much more disciplined, much more together. So Paul's sort of fighting that a little bit. Paul still wants to give this some structure. It puts him in a bad place. The others really are not as on board with this project too. So they're kind of half-hearted coming into it. And so I can see from a leadership perspective how frustrating that could be. And so then you overcompensate by then being overly bossy. And so that's kind of the unfortunate position that Paul found himself in. But then later on, you see that he also, contrary to the narrative, sticks up for John and Yoko, their relationship.
Yeah.
Which was a revelation. That was probably the best part of like the second episode for me.
Yeah.
It's that conversation early on with just him and Ringo. You see him defending, John and Yoko's relationship and being more tolerant than I think anyone had a right to expect. But also you see that there's that brief shot where, he's actually welling up and he's almost trying to hold back the tears of the realization of like, my life's unraveling here, So I think for anyone who's kind of vilified Paul as like the one who broke the Beatles as well, I mean, this is the beauty of this is it's painting very full portraits of these guys, and it's not always flattering, but it's reality.
Right, it's humanizing. Right, like yeah, I was surprised like by the focus on Paul, and I felt like that was a decision on Peter Jackson's part too, to really like have him be the not the anchor, but like I don't know what the analogy would be, but like have him be the pinnacle, the focus, as the most alpha, the most leader, and like the guy that steps up and everything. And so it's like you see he's the one that has the most to lose here. Like they all
Yeah,
seem like John or George and Ringo seem kind of ungrateful, like in a way.
yeah, and I think the others would have been content to remain a recording band for the rest of their career. Paul's a performer. Paul's an entertainer. You see how much more he comes to life when they get up on
Yeah,
that roof. It's
yeah,
unbelievable, right? I mean, all of them. I mean, it's a stellar moment. It's one of the Beatle highlights of all time. That performance, it's immaculate. Um, but how much more he comes to life in front of an audience, it's unbelievable. And that's why he's still touring to this day, or at least a few years ago, pre-pandemic. He's just a natural showman, and you could tell he wants to get back in front of an audience. He wants to perform live. That's going to be one of the last ideas that he puts forth for the Beatles is to start doing these sort of pop-up gigs under pseudonyms. And John just kind of tells him, "You're daft. I want a divorce," kind of thing.
right.
um, and that would be the first foundational thing that Paul would do in rebuilding Wings in the early 70s, is to do that university tour, just start popping up because of just simply for the love of performing. So you can see that he's feeling frustrated too and unfulfilled, because he got so much out of when they did that Hey Jude clip,
Yeah.
in Twickenham, under Michael Lindsay-Hogg and the live performance and what that gave to him. He wants to get back out there and perform and play.
So let's talk about Michael Lindsay-Hogg. So I told you I read this on the internet, so I don't know how credible, but when I saw this thing, I hadn't seen too much
Everything
of
you
it,
read on the internet is credible, right?
right?
Come on.
Everything on all sides.
Why would you question that?
My bad, my bad. I saw this thing. First of all, so I was in watching it, I was like, "Who is this guy?" And then he's like, I performed with Orson Welles, and I was like, "Man, that's crazy," because this guy looks like Orson Welles and sounds like Orson Welles. And then I read that Orson Welles might be his dad.
Yeah, and I've never made that connection, never read that and stuff like that. So that was a revelation when you mentioned that to me.
Yeah, it was so interesting. It was like I read on Wikipedia. I want to cite my source here.
Oh, well, then it has to be true.
I know, like who? But supposedly his mom had an affair with Orson Welles around the time. But then there were other people that were like, well, Orson Welles was out of town doing something else at that time, so it's not possible. And then he took a DNA test, and it came back inconclusive. But the dude looks and sounds like an Orson Welles offspring. So it blows my mind. But I don't know. I was very intrigued by him as a director, also trying to be an alpha, trying to take control, trying to make a story happen, and at the same token, being overwhelmed at times by these four powerhouses, these four legends. It's like, how do you even begin to like direct those guys? And
That's something that even Paul, it wasn't, they didn't have footage of it in this particular cut, but it's in the transcripts. If you read those of, Paul saying that normally, like, someone else would come in and kind of try to be the boss of this stuff. And that's the thing that they need. They actually need someone to take the reins and say, this is what we need to do. And Lindsay-Hogg, unfortunately, I mean, I don't think he was the guy to really sort of forcibly do that. He's trying to coerce them, because obviously he has his agenda. He's trying to make a film, an entertaining movie, and he wants the payoff of a live performance, which if I was directing the Beatles in a movie like this, absolutely I'd want the payoff of a live gig, and, in an interesting setting for cinematic purposes and all that. So he almost becomes, I know a lot of people were annoyed by him because he sounds like this kind of twerpy figure, constantly like, what about here and what about there in the boat and all that stuff. But he, also had a very hard job here. We owe him everything in terms of this footage, and in terms of, even his little sneaky techniques of sneaking microphones and plants and stuff like that to capture these
at the
amazing
cafeteria, yeah.
that even the most hardcore Beatles scholar, we even a week ago did not know a lot of this stuff existed. So we owe him everything as far as the coverage, the amount of coverage he got, and for hiding as many of the cameras and microphones and trying to get as much of that Peter Jackson and his team could then make something of those mono tapes and separate the different audio elements and stuff. So hats off to him. And this film also, I think, gave me more of an appreciation for what he initially did with Let It Be, even though it was a little bit kind of colored by, I guess, the agenda of trying to paint this as a breakup film. At the same time, the kind of concise nature of what he captured, I think, deserves a second look. And hopefully next year when we get the Blu-ray of that, which is also rumored, we can do a reassessment of that.
Dude, I need that movie more than I need another Mandalorian season. I just want to put that out there. Okay, like that is give me that. I want that. Like stream that on Disney Plus. So Bruce, what are you had a lot of notes. What are some closing thoughts? Like, is there anything else you want to add about this film, about this experience, watching these guys for 7.5 hours, these legends?
It was a privilege. It was a gift. It was an amazing thing to see. If you go back sort of on Rotten Tomatoes now, it's in the 90 percentile in terms of audience and critics. So obviously it's being seen in favor. People are getting a lot out of it. Again, if you're a musician, you're a Beatles scholar, you're going to love this just because of how in-depth, and if you're a creative person of any kind, I think you're going to get a lot out of this experience. Do I think it could have been refined even further? Yeah, I do, but it's a quibble. It's like, why looked, kind of a gift horse in the mouth. We have this abundance of, this treasure trove of material. And I can see kind of the balance that Peter Jackson had to strike, because between 50 hours, you have some fanatics that want all 50 hours of this, right? So he's trying to give you as much of the good stuff as you can get. But it was very illuminating. I think it really portrayed the Beatles in a much more nuanced light than we've gotten. But at the same time, they still retain the kind of the lovable qualities that we know about them, right? They're still the four guys that we know. We're privy to much more of their humanity, which in turn makes them much more, you connect with them, I think, a lot more in this context. And finally, like I said, when they had to deliver and when they do get up in front of a quote unquote audience, they're spectacular. I mean, that Rooftop performance is unbelievable. And it makes you think, like, God, if only they could have just done like one more tour, even if they didn't want to do it in the fashion that they had done previously, even if it was just a series of very kind of elite gigs at unique places, it just would have been great at this stage to see them do that. And maybe even bring back a few of the oldies, just, kind of updated for fun and stuff like that.
I mean, and I will say, like, it was fun listening because they do some of the oldies like throughout, like they're just like as they're warming up.
They tease it, which is a shame. They do little teasers of songs, which I'm like, oh, I just wish they'd done more versions of it. And they do like oldies, kind of the tip of their hat to that stuff. But I think too, we just have to MVPs of this, Billy Preston, who the minute he shows up, that just gives a lift to the whole thing. It just takes it to a whole nother level in terms of his musicianship, his amiability, his warmth. Glenn Johns, who's also like the fashion hero of this whole thing. People are like, making memes about like all his cool jackets and, his shades and all that stuff. But also we're talking about one of who go on to be a legendary engineer, work with Led Zeppelin, the Eagles, your favorites, The Who, in the 70s, a guy who also wrote a great book about his experiences, which I had the pleasure of reading earlier this year. Mal Evans, God bless him, their roadie, their trusted roadie. It's good to see him featured as much as he is in this. Debbie, the Apple receptionist, for I think it was Debbie, for holding off the cops as long as she did. She pulled every trick in the book there. And like I said, ultimately Michael Lindsay-Hogg for capturing all of this, that even Peter Jackson would say that he's indebted to him for everything, and so much so that making him a sort of honorary character in this piece.
Sorry, I was playing with my glasses. I had got new glasses today. Anyway, 100%. I know this is chock full of stuff. So like, sorry, you got all serious. Like you're waiting for me to say something genius. I'm like, no, what you said is perfect. I know this is dense, man. Like as you're saying all these things, like I'm thinking about every one of these characters that came to life, these ancillary characters, like the secretary, and I don't know anything about that. Where she tells the cops like, oh, there's a band on the roof. Like I don't know.
Yeah, all these people that live in Beatle mythology that you know of, and you kind of see them fully three-dimensional portraits. So that was kind of cool to see. And again, again, being privy to even just a bit of their creative process was amazing. Just watching Paul pull songs seemingly out of thin air, and just how effortless. I mean, he was just in such a zone, from like that 65 to 70 period. Just amazing. Just, even his knockoffs sound great, and then John eventually kind of steps up, and, when he has to deliver, John also, you see why he becomes John Lennon.
Yeah. And it's funny, what blows my mind in contrast though, again, humanizing, watching John try to think through or talk through a song. Like, he's fumbling, he's making mistakes, he's pitchy. Paul just like pulling a song out of thin air, it's pitch perfect. Like he's singing like perfectly in key all the time, and it's an open sound, and it sounds like, you're right, like he's a showman. Like that song existed 2 years ago. Like it sounds like he's just doing something, like even if it's the song like Get Back, where it's lyrics, it's completely different lyrics, it's a different message of the song, he's still selling it, like he's still performing it. It was really cool to watch.
Yeah, he's a marvel in this. Just again, watching him work, it's amazing. He lives up to the legend. And like I said, it's just like unfortunate that John was going through what he was going through in this period too, because peak era Lennon, which you can say was maybe obviously he dominated more in the early years. That strong figure, and in Revolver, his songs are amazing. To me, I love everything he did on the White Album. I mean, he's coming off a batch of tremendous songs, which I think outclassed Paul's on that album. As good as Paul's songs were, I think John outclassed him in that one. Paul would return the favor and outclass him a bit on Abbey Road. But John was still writing amazing songs. And, after this would go on, with Plastic Ono Band and Imagine to do incredible work as well. It's just, this is a very kind of ropey period, again, with, his addiction issues and things like that. So
all in all, would you recommend this film to a non-hardcore Beatles person?
That's a very hard thing. I would say if I were to recommend it and someone's curious, I would say watch it, but watch it in parts, and make it a little bit more digestible. It's a hard thing to recommend to non-fans because I don't see them tolerating. We're all steeped in the mythology. If you're a fan, you find even the smallest things intriguing because it's stuff you've heard about or stuff you always wanted to see, or you get the references, you get the in-jokes, you get the dynamic with the personalities, which is something I don't think if people know that or are fans are going to get it. Especially with part 2, where I felt like there were stretches of that really kind of got into the weeds and stuff. But I would say if anyone's curious, absolutely watch it in manageable chunks. That's the beauty of streaming, is that you can do that. Even if you're just interested in the creative process, by all means, dive in.
100%. I've been referring it to people. Like I've been telling people all about it all week. Like it's definitely worth the viewing if you're into it. If you're into the Beatles, like it's just, you're sitting down with these guys like in a way that it's unprecedented. So definitely a thumbs up. And as always, Bruce, thank you for your, I mean, I love when you're like, right, like in this person's book, like in this engineer's book or that, like, it's really cool talking to you about this stuff because you're so knowledgeable about all these things. So like,
well, look, even on the side here, this is a book that came out a while back. It's called Get Back, the Unauthorized Chronicle, the Beatles' Let It Be disaster. So this shows you what the reputation of this was, versus what we got to see, which demystified a lot of this, but there's areas of scholarship dedicated to just this period alone, that really paints it as like a miserable experience. Now, this is a good book, but these guys didn't have the access to everything that Peter Jackson does. And this was Doug Sulpy and Ray Schweidhart, just to kind of give them their due. But I know Peter Jackson actually referred to this in doing some of his research as well. So good book, but there was a lot of negative mythology. So this was good, if for anything else, just to set the record straight. And I think it does change the course of Beatles scholarship. It's going to eradicate a lot of stuff that exists, and it's going to change a lot moving forward in terms of what people see in this era. And how can you down this period that gave us not only the Let It Be album, but like half of Abbey Road and so many of the solo tracks. So to call this like an unproductive period or a disaster is a little bit, kind of hyperbole, or drama.
Well, you know, it's funny, like totally to that point. Like I said to you, I'm like, this movie felt like Empire Strikes Back on its own, and I would like to see, like in this case, I'd like to see Return of the Jedi. Like I want to see Abbey Road. Like I want to see the making of Abbey Road. That's for me, like that's something that would blow my mind. So, but you're right. This is the footage we have. It is a gift. It's a privilege. I'm very grateful for it. And yeah, any closing thoughts, Bruce? Hook us up.
No, no, just like I said, for those of you at Disney Plus, watch it. Hopefully we get a Blu-ray of it next year and we can kind of further dissect it. Definitely have to kind of go back and revisit it because I would be very curious to see what having acclimated to the pace of what it is, see how I feel about it watching it again. But yeah, again, for those of you watching, please share your comments because I know this has been, very rich with debate as far as how people feel about it. I mean, it's been mostly kind of positive feedback on it, but we're curious about people's takes on it. So like, subscribe if you like what you saw, give us some feedback, and hopefully we'll be back soon. Hopefully, I think we're going to be covering Cobra Kai soon, leading up to season 4. So there'll be some more good stuff on the channel.
That's right, my brother. Cobra Kai never dies.